Today, I'm digging into my crafty stash and doing a deep dive with this Catherine Pooler Cosmic Cover Plate die from a couple of years ago. One of the best things about pushing yourself to try different things with one supply is how much you can learn from it. Here's what this die taught me. Last month, I made this Christmas card with the same die by cutting out pieces from the die cut and arranging them on the card. Right away, I learned there's an optimal way to cut the larger circles from the cover plate die cut. The circle die I used was too large to cut more than one from each row, so by staggering it like this, I could get 8 large circles, and then I went back and I used a smaller die to create the 4 smaller circles. The next thing I learned when I looked at what was left. It looks so pretty with that bigger hole and the little die cut petals around it, so I knew that was going to be the first card for today. But before I go there, a little detour. Like so many people, I have the color cubes. And this year, I want to make an effort to use them to broaden my color palettes a little. So I chose one at random to be the color scheme for today's cards. Well, to be honest, this is the second one I chose. The first one was literally a Christmas tree. I think I'm done with Christmas for now. This color card translated very easily to some Catherine Pooler colors, and I decided to leave out that pale gray and just use white instead. So now let's dive right in. I used a small circle die and I cut the centers from all the starbursts. It took a while, and I learned that while Post-it tape and yellow tape both work really well at holding the die in place while it was cutting, the Post-it tape did a much better job for me in the climate conditions here at this time of year or whatever it is, but it didn't rip the cardstock when I removed it. I wanted to fill the holes with solid colored circles, and I was thrilled to see that this other Catherine Pooler cover plate die, called Don't Be Square, cuts circles the same size. I have 23 holes in my panel, and I can cut 13 circles at a time with this die cut, plus still have the cover plate die cut for a future card. And then, nope, they didn't quite fit. Time to pivot. I really didn't want to do 23 more die cuts, so I skipped ahead to another plan that I had, and I created my own stencil with a larger circle die and a Post-it note. I centered my homemade stencil over the starburst pattern, and then I blended some of the party dress ink through a bunch of them, forming a pattern. I wanted to introduce one of the other colors as well, so I grabbed the gingerbread and another Post-it note stencil, and I finished the panel by filling in those remaining areas. I was still pivoting, and I knew I would glue the panel to a white card base, but I wasn't sure what to do with those empty centers. So I swiped some of the s'mores ink and the buttercream ink onto a white panel, and then I cut it with the full circle die from Gina K's Lots of Dots to create some little embellishment dots to use. I played around with those for a bit, but I really didn't love it. So I changed gears again. I'm not going to lie, I was getting a little frustrated at this point that I had cut all these circles that I couldn't use, but I held on to them, and there's a happy ending coming. I used a little star stamp from one of a kind snowflake stamp set, and I used buttercream ink in the center of each of my rings. In the end, the buttercream is pretty subtle, and you almost don't really see the shape of the star, but it does look a little less stark white. I finished this one with the thank you sentiment from that same stamp set, popped it up on a circle die cut, and everything was framed with mats inked with the s'mores ink. And you can see the happy ending for my little dots. I ended up using them along with some diamond stickles as embellishments on all 4 of my cards. After that complicated and somewhat frustrating card, I decided to try an easier idea and create a shape cut from the cover plate panel. I wanted to have some color showing through the tiny holes, so I started with a solid heart and I blended my 4 colors onto it. Whenever I'm using colors I'm not used to, I love to blend them together to see how they work together and what different looks I can get. That s'mores ink is pretty dark, almost black, and I didn't want it to be too heavy. But then I remembered we're hardly going to see any of it once I put that top layer back on. The gingerbread and the party dress blend together to give a really nice rich deep orange, and then the party dress and the buttercream mix to give a really pretty peachy shade. I spent a minute or two figuring out where I wanted to cut the heart from the top layer. I wanted the starburst pattern to be symmetrical, but I also wanted to save as much of the panel as I could for future cards. Since the heart is mostly white, I created a pretty background by very lightly swiping the party dress and buttercream ink onto my panel. I love the streaky look where there's lighter and darker areas. I did another panel with the same light-handed technique and the 2 brown inks, and I almost got kind of a wood green look. I cut my hug's word from the center of the mat and I inlaid it into the pink shadow. I finished with some of those buttercream dots and some more stickles. This card is a great example of how a product that's designed to be used as a background can actually become the focal point of your card. And that's the exact topic I'll be presenting at the brand new Create with Your Craft Stash Summit coming up later this month. This new summit is different from others because we don't want you to buy anything new. The whole point is to get you using what you've already got, and we've got 23 speakers with loads of ideas for getting the most from your supplies. Like other summits, there's a free ticket and an upgraded ticket, and I've put a link in the description below so you can find out more about it. Ready for the next lesson? Looking at this, it's clearly not how to die cut an intricate cover plate die correctly, but I'm going to be making the best of this panel by trimming it down. I wanted to create a scalloped edge that would follow the pattern, but I'm not a great fussy cutter, and I would really prefer to have a line to cut along. My first thought was to flip it over and use my circle die to draw a line, but then I remembered my little homemade stencil. I started at the level I thought I wanted and I put the stencil down on the back of the die cut and I blended buttercream ink through. I was thinking that this will give me a clear scalloped line to fussy cut along, but as I worked, I also started thinking about the edges and I realized that I should be doing this on the row above where I started. That's where the pattern extends right to each edge. I may have to trim the bottom of the panel down later, but this will give me an edge-to-edge guide to follow. When I'm fussy cutting, I like to get rid of as much of the excess cardstock that I can before coming in and taking out the little bits. I tried to be as smooth as possible, and I came back when I needed to just round off any edges that were a little too sharp. I flipped the panel over and blended the buttercream, party dress, and gingerbread ink over in horizontal strips, creating those lovely blends again, but leaving the lightest edge where I had done my fussy cutting. Any roughness left in my scallops will be less visible if there's low contrast between the edges and the background. I finished this one with a mom die cut inked with the s'mores ink, and a little love you button popped up and placed so that it just fits inside the edge of the pattern. Card number 4 has a couple more lessons for us. I have this grand idea of having a different color behind each stardust by cutting a solid circle and inking it. But then I got clever. And by clever, I mean I created more work for myself by thinking it would be fun to have one color on the outer circle and a different one on the inner circle, at least for these 6 starbursts that kind of form a circle in the center. It seemed like a ring die cut would be a good option for this, so I got out a couple of my alphabet die sets, but the O's didn't quite fit. So I settled in to do it the hard way by using 2 circle dies. And then lightning struck. Remember this one? I wondered if those rings would fit, and they do. They have the same size inner circle as my O die, and the outside is a little thicker, so it will cover the outer circle of holes. Yay! I trimmed the rings out by hand, and then I colored 6 of them pink. And remember those dots I cut for the first card that were too big? Well, of course, they fit perfectly here. I inked them with s'mores ink. I figured the pink and dark brown would show through the best since they have the highest contrast. Then there was one more little problem, and that was gluing those rings onto the back. There's very little space between the holes, so I solved it by gluing the center down first and then taping the ring to the center. I finished the 6 pink and brown, and then I left the center one empty for my sentiment. I put 4 solid buttercream circles on the 4 remaining full starbursts, and I added buttercream dots on top in the centers. I backed the whole thing onto a gingerbread mat so it's peeking through any of the empty holes to give even more of a multicolored look. So what did I learn today? I learned that if you spend more time and try more ideas, you can get any craft supply to teach you its lessons and get lots of variety with it. And that means that even if all your crafty supplies are used and well loved, I bet you can get even more from them by taking another look. Don't forget to check out the Craft Stash Summit information that's linked below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.